In this video, I'm going to talk about derealisation. Derealisation is essentially feeling spaced out. It's the feeling of being somewhat disconnected from reality, like there's a veil in your reality that you're not quite able to see through. This isn't so much focusing on how to ground through derealisation, but it's to give you an insight. And that insight is that from our materialistic Western worldview, we view derealisation as somehow a flaw, that there's something pathologically wrong, that there's a fixed external reality, that there's an I that is separate from that reality, and that your perception of that external reality is somehow distorted. Now, it is distorted in the sense that if this dreamlike, veiled perception of reality is disturbing, or it feels like you're numb, or it feels like you aren't really there, it can be really unsettling. It can contribute to anxiety. I've experienced derealisation from a young age. It was at its most intrusive when I had a panic disorder. There was almost like a symbiotic relationship, like a vicious cycle where I would be in a situation, I'd feel anxious, but then I would notice that I felt quite disconnected, that I was dissociating from the present moment. And yeah, it's really quite a profound experience to feel that your surroundings are surreal, that there's a shift in what you perceive. And that in itself, when all you want to do is connect to the external reality, this experience of the surreal can then exacerbate the feelings of anxiety. So for me, I might be in a situation where I would notice the symptom of derealisation. I would think, oh no, I'm feeling spaced out, this isn't good. And this feeling in itself would heighten the anxiety. The most pronounced for me that derealisation has been is usually around a panic attack. It's quite common that people experience this, and it's actually a self-protection mechanism. It's something that is built in. A lot of people who experience trauma will dissociate. A lot of people in an emergency will enter this kind of dreamlike state so they can do what they have to do to either help themselves or help others. And it's only after that they kind of then readjust. So the nature of derealisation, although unsettling, is also largely impacted by the way that we view it. Now, back in the day, some close to probably 10 years ago now, or longer than that actually, I was really afraid of this sensation of derealisation. It felt very alien, and it wasn't something that I could find so much research on. I remember buying a book called Feeling Unreal, and it was a self-help book that was hidden in my stack in my room. Like I had a corner with all my self-help books I kept away. I didn't want anyone to see. And Feeling Unreal was one of them. And I remember reading this and having quite a profound shift when in the book it's mentioned that for some people this feeling of derealisation is desirable. It's something that people find can help them. Now, I have experienced this. I've had times where feeling slightly disconnected, feeling slightly dreamlike has allowed me to enter a different state of consciousness. It might be that I'm in a social setting, or that I'm about to give a presentation. The presentation example was a double-edged sword, because I've also had moments where I've felt in the build-up to a presentation so disconnected, so spaced out, that it's made me unbearably anxious. But as this has shifted, so has my perception on what the quality of derealisation is. Initially, it was to understand that it wasn't something necessarily to be feared. And this was a long time ago. This was before I was into meditation. But just having the understanding that it's not a state to be feared allowed me to work with the feeling, work with the sensation, rather than fight it. Every time it arrived, there would be a tendency for me to resist this sensation, which actually only made it worse. The more I embarked on the spiritual path, the more the sensation of derealization took on a deeper meaning. When you look at a lot of Vedic philosophy, or theories in Buddhism, or Hinduism, a lot will talk about reality being like a dream. The illusion of reality, which is called Maya, is very dreamlike. It's almost a hallucination, that the spiritual realm, the consistent, eternal realm, is behind the impermanent illusion of things. Whilst this was a state that I saw as undesirable, like I wanted to become more attached to the material, I wanted to be part of the reality that I believed everyone was in and that I was disconnected from, I started to realize that in Eastern philosophy, they talk about this state as being one of awakening and one closer to enlightenment than if you're really attached to the physical reality. It's not to say that derealization in itself is a sign of enlightenment, but it is to say that our worldview, the Western worldview that we have, contributes to this state being misunderstood. Over the years, through meditation, I've been able to ground myself in different ways, and I will discuss this in future videos. But the importance has been dissecting derealization, and rather than feeling like it was an experience I didn't want, and rather than feeling like it was a disconnect from an external fixed reality, I started to question, well, what are the sensations? What's involved in derealization? What is it that I actually dislike? Because all of us throughout our life at some point will have deliberately embarked on some kind of behavior to induce derealization. Now I'm talking about drinking alcohol, talking about taking drugs, right? When we actually have an external entity, when we can pinpoint this is the cause for the current state, then we're better able to be with the experience and to enjoy it, right? So it's kind of ironic that there's a state that you have without any external stimulus that most people spend a lot of money to achieve, yet when you experience it, there's a lot of confusion. You might feel like something is really going wrong, you know, that there's something that you're going crazy, that you're losing your mind. But when you begin to dissect derealization, at least in my experience, I did a lot of this without instruction. It was kind of just through self-inquiry. I looked at what are the different elements. What is it that makes it really unsettling? When I removed this desire to reconnect to the external reality, I realized that actually what I needed to do was reconnect to the place within myself that was grounded, that was more stable. When I felt really disconnected, it was the times when I was also really disconnected from mostly my emotional body. So it could be that I was numb from depression, or that I had a lot of sadness that I wasn't willing to feel. It's almost as if when there is unprocessed emotion, we can disconnect from our hearts, and in disconnecting from the heart, we create that veil through stagnant energy, right? It's like the emotions that we're holding in veil us from the reality. So there was a real sense for me a lot of the time that what I was actually afraid of was feeling disconnected from myself. And in any environment where I was reflected, I was actually, you know, if you're in a social situation, yourself is reflected through the people you interact with. So these interactions were highlighting that I was disconnected from myself. So one of these elements that make derealization unsettling is the feeling of unprocessed emotions. It could be that you have to look within and process and release these emotions or this trauma in order to have a clearer perception. There is a difference. I've experienced a lot of the times in altered states of awareness, for example, a very dreamlike quality that is much more divine and joyful and blissful than the sense of derealization. They're two sides of the same coin. Now, one of them is seen as desirable, a feeling of, oh, there's some kind of ethereal, numinous quality to my surroundings, is filled with a sense of joy, a sense of connection and oneness. If we can shift and explore derealization within a much more expansive paradigm, so within a framework where we understand that the external reality is not fixed, that actually there's more of an interconnected nature at play, then we explore derealization from a completely different viewpoint, and it can really catalyze our spiritual growth. What I will say is that it can take some time to move from the unsettling, ungrounded experience into a more grounded, dreamlike state. It's not a smooth transition. And it might be that when you are still adjusting to processing emotions and to grounding in to the nature of reality beyond Maya, which is the greatest challenge that you have on the spiritual path, it could be that you want to look at different grounding methods in the meantime. I would always recommend extending self-compassion in these experiences. Acceptance and mindfulness of the experience is really a great starting point in terms of just being with the experience of derealization without the judging mind perceiving it to be wrong. The conventional ego-based waking state, rational consciousness, however you would like to define it, is not the ultimate goal. It's not that we want to latch on to that state, because that state in itself is restricted. And if you're having experiences of expansion, and derealization is one of those experiences, it doesn't feel like it, but it's almost a call to look within, a call to process, a call to release. When you're going through this process, it's really important to understand that there are higher states of consciousness, and that this pathway isn't one of losing your mind, but it's one of reconnecting to those higher states of consciousness beyond the illusion of Maya. So I hope this video has been helpful. It's a topic that is really important to discuss because it affects people, whether they're experiencing panic attacks or ego death. A lot of people feel derealization after psychedelic experiences, for example. But it is an experience that can be integrated, and this is just a really basic video to cover some elements, but I will address this topic again. I also want to note that derealization is separate from depersonalization. Depersonalization is the feeling that your sense of self is kind of dissolved, that you lose a bit of connection to your self-image. It's still within the same realm, but I'll go more into detail into that at another point, because derealization as an individual experience is much more about the dreamlike, surreal, disconnected experience of reality. I hope that these words have helped. Please do subscribe to the video below. You can also read my book, Mindsets for Mindfulness, which provide tools to help you on your spiritual path, and they've really helped me in this transition from derealization into a much more enjoyable, expansive state. You can get that book when you join the Mind That Ego mailing list. But until next time, take care.